Good morning, everyone. This is Doug. This is an episode which is a blockbuster in the sense that there's a passage in Flavius Josephus's work from 92 AD, approximately 60 years after Christ's crucifixion and ascension. He is definitely leaving in some things that maybe he wasn't supposed to. He had been a general in the army of the Jewish people in Judea against the Romans in the war in the 60s, and when he was captured, he defected over to the Romans. He said, "I want to work with you guys," and and so that can happen. There can be defectors, but he was open about what he's doing. And yet, on the other hand, when you read carefully, he's going to give away some of the secrets of the Herodian party. That's the party, the agency the Romans were using to control the people in various provinces, not provinces, or divisions of the land of Judea and the outlying areas. So that he's going to give away a secret here, and I'm going to show you what it is. But I've never seen anybody talk about this and how he is explaining how the Herodian family, all the way up to Caiaphas, until Caiaphas is discharged in 36 AD, the same year, by the way, that Paul claims his, quote, conversion event on the road to Damascus. Coincidence that Caiaphas quits or is fired by the Herodians, and then Paul takes a new venture, which is actually, I believe, defect over into Christianity and make us think he's defecting when he really hasn't. It's just another form of infiltration. But anyway, let's take a look at this title of this slide. Paul's family, the Herodians, made their murder of Jesus, namely Herod Antipas, Herod the Tetrarch. He's the one who murdered Jesus. No high priest was really willingly going along. This was something he had to do. He was serving the Herodians. And so this theater was made to make it look like the high priest was asking for this, right? That's what it looks like to you. And we think that's what's happening, but that's not what's happening. The high priest is a puppet for Herod Antipas. And even there, the servants of uh, the high priest come in and say, "We can't kill Jesus. You have to do it. And there's going to be an uprising and so on if we don't kill him." And Pilate says, "I'm not going to kill him. I don't see anything guilty in him. I'm going to go ask Herod Antipas," and that's what he does. And Jesus comes back with a crown of thorns on his head, and basically wearing a robe, a mock robe that that all signifies that he's a rebel. He's trying to claim he's king. He's wearing a crown. He's got this robe we put on him, and his blood's dripping all over him. This tells Pilate what to do: kill him. But we read the context and we see the high priest brought there to the place where Pilate was, uh, the message and the demand, "Please kill Jesus." And so we're thinking it's coming from what? From the people who are on the streets. But even the servants of the high priest are saying the people in the streets are threatening, we're at risk. They could go and revolt. So this is an action they need to take to stop a political risk to Rome. They're even telling Pilate that, and it's not getting through. But we being dumb Gentiles and not knowing what's really going on in the big picture, we think this is the high priest. And when Paul says the Jews killed Christ, we're thinking that's really what happened here. That's what Paul says in First Thessalonians. Now, let's see why Paul could blame the Jews. He was part of that cover up. He was a servant himself of this Herodian family that were using Caiaphas in this execution of Jesus. Josephus reveals in the passage we're going to read, the Herods, Paul's family, we'll show you that proof later, used the high priest Caiaphas as a puppet by controlling his clothes to give cover for their crimes to suppress threats of revolution. So what greater thing to do is make it look like the Jewish people want this person killed, Jesus, not us. But that person is doing it because of you control him, and he can't do anything without your permission, and you're going to tell him what to do. His whole persona is to serve the Herodians because he's been forced into this position where his clothing, which he can't even go out of the house without uh, this headdress that says the righteousness of God, and other accoutrements likely had to be worn beside just that. And he is trapped, and he is, as I show here in the puppet on the left there, the strings of his clothing actually were the strings of the puppet marionette that he really is functioning as for the Romans. And one other takeaway from this is that Paul's key power role was Paul could use executive royal authority of the Herodians. So remember, he's murdering people, but in John, the high priest servants say, we can't execute him because we're deprived of that under Roman law. So you've got to do it, Pilate. And they're begging him to do this based on the threat to public safety. Okay. So that's Paul's doing the same thing. He's going to take this role on and kill Christians. How can he get away with that? Oh, the high priest is directing me. That's what you even think is happening. And so you're thinking, oh, it's the Jewish people who's trying to kill Christians. No, it's the Romans using a puppet, the high priest Caiaphas, to kill Christians. So let me show you how an Herodian like Paul will use the cover of the high priest. He's going to say something in Acts 22, verse 4-5. He's in front of a crowd of people, and he's going to explain his life story to them. And let me read this slide. Paul's implication: he was serving the high priest in such murders, but that is an Herodian tactical misdirection to use the high priest as a puppet, whom was made into a scapegoat for killing Christ and for Paul's murders, made to appear solely on behalf of the high priest. So watch what he does. As you'll see later, this is not the picture that's really going on. And I persecuted this way unto the death, binding and delivering into prison both men and women. So Paul is not denying he's murdering Christians, right? But that's an evil thing normally. So who is he to blame? Let's see. As also the high priest does bear me witness. So this is actually somebody his family controls. So he can say this. And all the estate of the elders, from whom I also received letters unto the brethren. So he's saying, I got letters from these figures, starting with the high priest, to give me control over Christians who kill them. But again, we know from the book of John, the high priest had no authority to kill anybody. And he was saying, Pilate, that's why we're asking you to do it. Okay. And then Pilate says, well, I think he's innocent, so I'm going to send him on to Herod Antipas, Herod the Tetrarch. He's in town. He rules over Galilee. Let's see what he says. And that's where the crown of thorns episode happens. But anyway, let's keep going. And I went to Damascus, and to bring them which were bound unto Jerusalem for to be punished. So he's making it sound like he's just under the direction of the high priest, when it's the other way around. But that's using the high priest as a scapegoat. So this is an Herodian tactic. You're seeing it right in front of you. This is a real reason why you're kept in the dark, and nobody wants to tell you what Flavius Josephus said. I want to back up what I said. When Paul had the power to kill people, he was getting it from his Herodian family, not from the high priest. And you're going to see that here. And I just want to show you also, AI makes a mistake, and they're going to lump in the Pharisees were asking for the death of Jesus. And that's not true when you read the actual context of John 18. In John 18:31, representatives of the Pharisees, false, I'll show that to you, and high priest, it's actually the representatives of the high priest, tell Pontius Pilate they don't have the authority to execute anyone. Not that the high priest doesn't have any authority to kill anyone. This occurs after Pilate suggests they judge Jesus according to their own law. And they respond by saying they, the high priest, actually lack the power to carry out a death sentence. Now let's read the verses together. This is a crucial thing because, again, where's Paul getting his authority to kill anyone? He's not getting it from the high priest, who he is trying to scapegoat and say, he's the guy telling me what to do. No, you're getting the Herodian power from the family you are belong to, because you have executive authority from them by delegation. Now let's read verse 26 of John 18. One of the servants of the high priest, not Pharisees, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, said, I saw you in the garden. You have to go back this far to make sure you know who's involved here. With him, did I not? Then Peter denied it again. Immediately a rooster began to crow. That's verse 27, right? So now let's go to verse 27. Remember, the last reference is servants of the high priest. And where are they? You're going to find out in 28. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas. So where were they? They were in the high priest's office, okay, to the governor's headquarters. So the governor is Pilate. So they're not at, these people are talking to Peter at Caiaphas's location, and they're the servants of the high priest. And now they're going to take Jesus from Caiaphas, the servants of the high priest, to the governor's headquarters, to Pilate's headquarters. It was early, and they did not go into the governor's headquarters, so they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover meal. Next, so Pilate came outside of them and said, what accusation are you bringing against this man? So in other words, Pilate leaves his building. He goes outside to these Jewish servants of the high priest, that's the people that have been referenced, and he asks them, what do you want me to do? What's this accusation? They replied to him, saying, if this man were not doing something wrong, we would not have handed him over to you. Wow, how logical is that? Okay, they have no basis to this, and they're not going to explain everything to him. Just do it. But he's not going to do it. He says no. Okay, in the end, and he says, I'm going to go ask Herod Antipas. All right, so moving from verse 30 to 31, this verse is the key verse. Then Pilate said to them, take him yourselves and judge him according to your law. Okay, but he doesn't know they want a death penalty. See, he doesn't know what their aim is because he just said he did something wrong, right? They didn't say a death penalty offense. What would that be? The Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. So these servants of the high priest, who has been referred to, and they left Caiaphas' offices to come bring Jesus to Pilate. And then Pilate says, I don't have to take care of this case. You can do it yourselves. And they said, but we don't have authority to kill Jesus. Okay, so the high priest by himself doesn't have authority. They have to get that from Roman sources. Only the Romans can exercise the death penalty in the regions of the Tetrarchy and the rule of the Herodian family and all of these also civil administration regions. I showed you in the last video on the history of Judea and the regions around Galilee and Perea and so on. This is all their administration, but they have different fractured little networks of what's going on. But the point is they are the only people who can kill people. The Romans only can do that. And that's what this is being acknowledged here. And that's very important because now the high priest is being forced to be in this position of asking for death for Jesus, right? So who are you going to blame when history books have to be written? What do the Romans want done? The Herodian Romans want done. They want the story to read that, well, we didn't really do anything. It was the high priest. He was the one who asked for the death of Jesus, okay? That's exactly the idea of creating a scapegoat and controlling him through his garments, which we'll see Josephus talks about very clearly. That's how you can make him the scapegoat every time. He's got to do this because that's what the Herodian family want. But Pilate's just a simple civil servant. He's not an Herodian. He's simply doing Rome's will. He's an officer there. But he knows Herod Antipas is the guy involved, so he's going to turn him over soon and have Herod Antipas make the decision, which he effectively does by sending back the person, Jesus, with the blood of dripping from the crown of thorns on a mock robe. But even there's no statement necessary out loud that we're kill him. It's just implied, and then the history books are written where it was Caiaphas, the high priest, who wanted Jesus killed, and the Jews killed Jesus. That's what Paul says in Thessalonians. The Jews killed Jesus. No, it was your family, Paul. That's a nice blame shifting. It was your family manipulating and controlling the high priest to do that deed. Now let's get to Josephus's quote. He's going to be talking about a guy named Vitellius. Who is that? In Josephus 18.14.2, he says, Vitellius, a man that had been consul and who was now president of Syria. What does a consul mean? He was to be a Roman consul in the time of Christ, roughly 1st century CE, meant holding a largely symbolic and prestigious, though significantly diminished office within the framework of the Roman Empire, and which had transitioned from a republic to an autocratic system under the emperor. Okay, so he held a significant office. It used to be a very significant co-ruler office of the entire empire, but now it's just simply more honorarium, but also has some influence and prestige. But now he's also the leader of the province of Syria. Okay, so the Romans were controlling Syria through other individuals, and Vitellius is now going to do something in relation to the high priest. By the way, this is in the Antiquities of the Jews, book 18. Now, this is, I want you to know the garments issue about the high priest. Let's listen to what we would find out. Yes, the golden plate inscribed with holiness to the Lord, Exodus 28:36-38, was meant to be worn on the high priest's forehead whenever he entered the tabernacle or interacted with the people. So can he go outside without this thing on his head? No. And it says right here in verse 36, and thou shalt make a plate of pure gold, engrave upon it, like the engravings of a signet, the words holiness to the Lord, holiness to Yahweh. So what would that look like when the high priest went outside? Would it be obscure, hard to see? No, pretty much anybody could see it. It says holiness to Yahweh here on this band. And that's what he had to have this on, or he didn't have the authority. And he would be committing a crime against God's word to walk outside without this on his head, plus all his other garments likely. All right, so now let's take a look at Antiquities of the Jews, book 18, 3, and it says AD 36. So these events that are being recorded here are AD 36, but it goes all the way back to Herod the Great, so that was before BC. So what this control of the high priest has been going on for decades within the family of the Herodians. So I just want to show you, it's going to talk about terminating Caiaphas right here. Let me show you. Caiaphas. So this 36 AD is talking about an event in the end, which happens in 36 AD. That's how we know when it happened. Okay, but he's going to give you all the background of how they controlled, the Romans controlled, the Herodians controlled the high priest. But Josephus is very helpful here. But I'm going to read the whole thing, so please be patient. But Vitellius came into Judea and went up to Jerusalem. It was at the time of that festival, which is called the Passover. Vitellius was there magnificently. There was one of the high priests named Hyrcanus, and as there were many of that name, he was the first of them. This man built a tower in the temple, and when he had so done, he generally dwelt in it. Now, I want to indicate Hyrcanus is a high priest in a much earlier time period than Caiaphas, and had these vestments with him, because it was lawful for him alone to put them on. So only one person can ever wear these garments, the high priest. And he had them reposited when he went down in the city and took his ordinary garments. So these could be kept inside the city, and then he would take his ordinary garments and walk over there. So somehow he went out outside of the house. That's what we're supposed to understand. So this guy did not follow the rigid rules that appears to be in the Bible. But regardless, the same things were continued to be done by his sons and by their sons after them. So this pattern of having the clothes pre-positioned near the temple was going on for some time period. Not allowed by God's word, just going on anyway. The same things were continued to be done by his sons and by their sons after them. So now let me just point out what you're going to now hear is Herod's going to take advantage of the situation. Herod the Great, who dies in 4 BC. He realizes, hey, these garments are not being kept in these guys' homes. That was Hyrcanus' mistake. If somebody figured out where you were hiding them outside, they could just themselves take control of that and control you, because now you can't even technically be out. You shouldn't be outside in the first place, but now you can't do any of your service. Okay, so what if the Herodians take control of this? Watch what happens. But when Herod came to be king, and that is about generation before 4 BC, he rebuilt this tower, which was very conveniently situated in a magnificent manner, and because he was a friend of Antonius, he called it by the name of Antonia. And as he found these vestments lying there, he retained them in the same place, as believing that when he had them in his custody, the people would make no innovations against him. In other words, if he could keep these garments, he was doing it to suppress the high priest getting out of the house, trying to give any directions to the people with his authoritative headdress on it all. And that's, you can see the master stroke here. The mistake of Hyrcanus to have started the practice of having the garments not in your home, and then Herod over that building, and then turned this into a way of controlling the high priest. And what? To prevent the people to make any innovations against him. Let's continue. The like to what Herod did was done by his son Archelaus, who was made king after him. After whom the Romans, when they entered on the government, took possession of these vestments of the high priest and had them reposited in a stone chamber under the seal of the priests and of the keepers of the temple, the captain of the guard lighting a lamp there every day. And 7 days before a festival, they were delivered to them by the captain of the guard. So, in other words, the high priest's garments were being guarded by captains of the guard, meaning these are Roman officers guarding these garments, so nobody could take them, including the high priest. But when the festivals came up, they would bring them dutifully to the high priest, but not always. That's the whole point. The whole point was the high priest knew he was their marionette. They were pulling the strings. He couldn't function if they didn't want him to. When the high priest, having purified them and made use of them, laid them up again in the same chamber where they had been laid up before, and this the very next day after the feast was over. So now he had to actually put the garments back where these guards, or the Roman guards, are going to guard it. So he wasn't free to take it home and treat it as his own. He had to bring it back. So Josephus is giving you every detail that you know the high priest is a marionette. He knows he can't get away from these people. This was the practice at the 3-year festivals and on the fast day. I want to read you something very interesting where he talks about but Vitellius here at the end. Now, I read this a little quickly, and I thought our own would have been our Roman Josephus. But Josephus makes it clear he's speaking for the Jewish people. This is called Antiquities of the Jews, because you can see he says but Vitellius put those garments into our own power as in the days of our forefathers. He's talking about the Jewish people. So he's writing a book primarily for Jewish people, by the way. The history of the Jews is what it is, the Antiquities of the Jews. So if this is putting an end to the Herodian control over the garments. Listen to this. But Vitellius put those garments into our own power, as in the days of our forefathers, and ordered the captain of the guard not to trouble himself to inquire where they were laid or when they were to be used. So that was what the Herodians had happened. So that role of that guard was to cease, and Vitellius putting end to the Herodian domination of the clothing. Okay, and this he did as an act of kindness. And this is where I was reading it more carefully. I said, oh, well, like he's saying to whom? To the Jewish people, to oblige the nation to him, the nation of the Jewish people. Besides which, he also deprived Joseph, who was also called Caiaphas. So, in the same stroke, he then gets rid of Caiaphas, the Herodian lackey of the high priesthood, and appointed Jonathan, the son of Ananias, the former high priest, to succeed him, after which he took his journey back to Antioch, Syria. So what we have here is a very interesting sequence of events. Let me show you this on a timeline, and you'll see my point. So I've only modified the Blue Letter Bible by adding the Antiquities of the Jews of these events that Vitellius does. He ends the Herodian control of the high priest's garments, right? Tells the guard no longer care about where they are. Don't worry. That's no longer your responsibility. And then he sacks Caiaphas as a high priest, the Herodian lackey. So he does two things to break off the high priest any longer having any political purpose. Okay, you can't. The Jewish people don't want you to try to control him, to make a point, and you scapegoat him anymore. So that's the end of that. So that mission that Paul had been working on has been taken away by a guy who at least has the prestige as the governor of Syria and also a former consul of the empire. Even though that office is not like the emperor anymore, or the ruler as it used to be, it's still very influential. And he seems to be able to just walk into Jerusalem and tell this stuff to be happening, and people will obey him because Vitellius is of a higher status than most other people. So now ask yourself, if Paul is working for the high priest, and the high priest's garments are the way they're being controlled and manipulated by the Herodian party, and if Paul is an Herodian, we'll show you who he is in a moment, and Vitellius sacks Caiaphas, the high priest, the guy who's been working for all this time, the guy who was made the scapegoat of killing Jesus and uh, that kind of thing. And here he is. He's now been fired by Vitellius. Get lost. And that breaks the Herodian power of the high priest's office and using them any longer as scapegoats. And all the killings that Paul did was all scapegoated onto Caiaphas as well through Paul's testimony I read you earlier from Acts 22. So this conversion of Saul now has a different appearance, doesn't it? Paul's out of a job in 36, same year. Okay, all this has happened in 36 AD. Same year, he no longer can be using the high priest as his lackey. So infiltration would be the next strategy of an Herodian, right? You're going to invade that group. You're going to claim a defection. You're going to claim you saw a vision in the sky. Nobody can prove whether you did or didn't. And you're going to tell people many years later, Luke, way after the fact, what you say happened, and nobody could prove it at the time. And in fact, Luke records in Acts 9, the disciples at Jerusalem did not believe Paul had met Jesus. Okay, it says that in Acts 9, around 24, 26. So, and nothing changes in that chapter. It never says, oh, they accepted him. No, instead, what happened is they looked for an opportunity to get rid of him, and they sent him back to Cilicia and shipped him. They brought him all the way back to Tarsus in Cilicia. That's what happens in Acts 9. So they didn't trust him, and we shouldn't either. Not at that point. But he doesn't do anything negative or positive for over 14 years. It goes to Arabia, and that's a whole other issue. But that's why there was no reason to take any action against him, because he was doing nothing. Okay. And the first time he does any kind of, quote, missions, which are all to Herodian places, which the Herods had done benefaction in Asia Minor and that region of Turkey today, is he was going off doing stuff that they could have no clue. They can't speak Greek, and they don't know what he's doing, and they're not monitoring him. So whatever he's doing is, he meets a guy named Luke, and Luke and him hang out, and that's basically all we know. and the only person who validated he was doing anything. But Luke has him being a very normative person, preaching, teaching a gospel of the works worthy of repentance. That's in Acts 26, testimony in front of King Agrippa. So Luke has no idea there's anything strange going on with Paul. But the point is that Paul is taking no stance against Jesus' doctrines at this point, and he's able to be claiming as an affiliation and get people like Luke to believe him. And then he ends up what? He ends up learning information and finds out more and more about Christianity to serve whom? The Herodian party. So that's what his real role was, and that's what is obviously what's going on. He has lost this power through the office of high priest being controlled by his family, and then he could cover all his crimes and murders through basically putting on the high priest, make it look like he was the one who sent letters to go get people to kill them, when the high priest, doesn't even have this authority, as was established in John 18, as we read you earlier. So now let me prove to you Paul is an Herodian. All right, so it's very easy to prove Paul is a member of the Herodian family. This one is probably the easiest. Romans 16, verse 11, King James, salute Herodian, my kinsman. Herodian, the I-O-N, means in Greek, son of. And the Herod name is a proper name, so that makes it very clear. It's a son of Herod. And my kinsman is self-explanatory. It means it's my relative. And we have many references to a guy named Saulus in the book of Josephus' Antiquities, and in his War of the Jews, that is a guy who fits Paul. But at that time, he was going by the name Saul, which, by the way, in the book of Acts, he starts off only using the name Saul or Saulus, and that is the name Josephus talks about of a person who fits Paul to a T. And he was said by Josephus to be a member of the family of Herod Agrippa. And guess what? This Romans 16:11. At this time, Herod Antipas was killed around 39 AD in his war with King Aretas, and the only person this is likely referring to is Herod Agrippa, the same person that Saulus in Josephus is related to. Now, I just want to show you something. This is an article by a teacher of ancient Greek. She has no religious affiliation, no religious undertones to her writing, and you can get straight answers from those type of people. Unfortunately, there's theological driven translations and theological dictionaries. They don't hide it anymore, that they're going to come up with theological meanings. But this has no other explanation than just what she's going to tell you. Lois Knight, March 2021. Welcome to the family. How the ancient Greeks named their children. Surnames. Ancient Greeks did not have surnames like we do today. They used instead patronyms. A patronym is simply a name that comes from the child's father and would mean son of, or I-O-N, or daughter, I-O-N-E. Those are endings. For instance, Demophon, the son of Cadmos, would be known as Demophon Cadmos' son, or Demophon Cadmion. Okay, so Cadmion is the way you would indicate that it's a son of Cadmos. If Cadmos had a daughter named Euphemia, then she would be known as Euphemia, Cadmos' daughter, or Euphemia Cadmione. Okay, so there it is. There's simple, straightforward. If you asked AI, you even get the same answer. The suffix ion can be used as a patronymic signifying son of, for example, Demophon, son of Cadmos. They're actually linking this. But there is no other explanation for this. I don't think there's any doubt about it, but you can find theologically driven dictionaries, I'm sure somewhere, who know this is a problem and they don't like it, and they're going to try to say, well, it doesn't always have to mean son of. Of course it means son of Herod. But anyway, let's keep going. And I'm just trying to tell you, there's probably some counter argument that you just have to understand. People, we need to go to people who don't have any theological axe to grind. Lois Knight is an objective person. She's obviously just telling you how it works, and there's no complexity to this. Anyway, Paul also salutes a guy named Aristobulus at Rome, the name of another son of Herod, Romans 16, verse 10. Salute them which are of Aristobulus' household. Now, you're going to go, why were all these Herodian people there in Rome? Well, this is where they hang out. They are rulers for Rome, and they don't necessarily spend a lot of time in the area that you would think they would be, Judea and Galilee and Perea and the other regions that they administer. Now, I just want to show you where this all Aristobulus is on the list. Herod the Great dies in 4 BC. He has these 4 sons, Archelaus, Herod Antipas, Philip, besides Aristobulus. Herod Antipas, one we've been talking about in the past, this was a guy who the Jesus was sent by Pilate to him to get a response. Do I have to kill this guy? And he sends it back with the crown of thorns, blood bleeding on a mock robe, right? So he is a bad guy. Okay, definitely bad guy. And Aristobulus is a brother of his, and Paul is saluting as Aristobulus, at, at a person named Aristobulus, likely the same family member. Now, just want to show you that if you go to Wikipedia, it'll say Aristobulus may be mentioned in the New Testament in the Epistle to the Romans, Romans 16:10. Salute them which are of Aristobulus' household. Then they suggest this. I just want you to know, I'm giving you full disclosure here. Although this may mean members of the household of the late Aristobulus IV. So there was some other person known in the world as Aristobulus IV, kingdom ruler of some place. But it's obviously they're just providing you what other people have tried to provide as cover, but now the evidence starts to mount, and so we'll keep going. Now we're going to show you a verse in Acts 13:1 that, in my mind, is decisive. Now there were in the church that was in Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon, that was called Niger, and Lucius of Cyrene, likely Luke, and Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch and Saul. You're going to go, well, doesn't it sound like Manaen was brought up with Herod the Tetrarch and Saul? Yes, because that's exactly how you figure it out in Greek. You have to say it out loud. And you'll find other Bibles will put, or other translations other than the King James will put parentheses around Saul and, make it sound like he's not connected to this whole thing with Herod, Herod the Tetrarch, which is Herod Antipas. No, he was brought up with Herod Antipas, Manaen was, and Saul. And the actual word there in Greek is syntrophe, which means to eat together, but it also has this connotation of as children nursing from the same nurses. Because in that culture, it was very common to have women in a family could share that obligation to take care of the children. Anyway, so that's the word that's been used, and that signifies a close intimacy between these three. And Dr. Taylor Marshall, PhD guy, he wrote an article in 2015. He's a Catholic scholar. Was St. Paul related to Herod? 7 reasons Paul was an Herodian. And he gives this as one of them, this whole example here. And he makes a point himself. Manaen had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch and Saul. And he italicizes it so you can see it, Acts 13:1. Now he says the Greek is unclear, but there is certainly a group of young Jewish men in Antioch who are associated with Herod Antipas the Tetrarch. The Greek is not unclear, just to be clear. Okay. Now, just to go read further. According to Josephus, Herod Antipas the Tetrarch, his full brother Archelaus, and his half-brother Philip were raised and educated in Rome. Josephus Antiquities 17.20-21. So I wanted to read that because, again, you're wondering, why is Paul addressing people in the prior example I gave you? Salute Herodian, who's at Rome, obviously, and Aristobulus, who's at Rome, because these people travel there all the time, okay? Hence, those raised with Herod Antipas the Tetrarch were educated in Rome. So, again, all the Herodians were probably all sent there to be educated, not only in Greek and Latin and all the things that you need to do, but become administrators and know Roman law and also know how to pay the taxes back to Rome that you're collecting. And I just want to explain something else to you. Is some people will, like I said to you, put in different punctuation as if there was they have a magic wand that they can just tell you this is not connected. And I just want to let you know, in addition, this is a Greek language and linguistics website, and this is an extraction from 2022. In the ancient Greeks used no spaces between words or paragraphs. So imagine there's no words and there's no punctuation. There's just letters. Okay, so that's how the only way to know, my educators in high school, prep school, explained it to me, is you just have to read it out loud. That's how you translate Greek, and you have to recognize the words. So what this is called is text were a continuous string of letters with an occasional blank line inserted to mark the end of a major section, though even this was not always done. They also had no equivalent to our lowercase letters. So there's no signal to why, is there started with a new sentence with a capital? No, nothing. So that's why we know what this means. We don't have to, see how it's punctuated with parentheses and subparagraphs. And no, they are embarrassed by it, but it's just a fact. The next fact is decisive. Paul was a Roman citizen from birth, the rarest privilege of all, And by the way, Caesar's list in his office in the desk is about a page long of names that are on the list of Roman citizens. That's how narrow it is. It isn't everybody gets Roman citizenship. It's a very elite privilege, and only basically the rulers and certain military people who've become generals and survived decades in the army, they could get citizenship if they applied for it. Paul makes this statement that he was a Roman citizen from birth in Acts 22, verse 28. I'll read. The commanding officer answered, I obtained this citizenship with a large sum of money. So that's another way you could get it. Just pay a lot of money and you can get that special privilege. Now, Paul responds. Paul answered, but I was even born one. So he's saying, I'm even higher than you. And that really has to trigger a fear and trembling in this Roman officer, which explains why he took all the precautions he did with basically almost 300 troops to protect Paul in this instance. And we'll get into that later. This is what Eisenman explains in the book, The First Christians, page 237. He explains, it is also very easily explains the matter of Paul's Roman citizenship, which is meaning the Herodian connection, which is such an important element in these escapes. It will be recalled that Josephus records that Herod and his father, the first Roman procurator in Palestine, after the original storming of the temple by Pompey's forces in 63 BC, were granted citizenship in perpetuity along with all their heirs for conspicuous services rendered in the cause of Rome. As it turns out, this Roman confidence was not ill-placed. So there you go. This is not normal to be a Roman citizen and then to be from birth. That is a unique, very small group. And I don't know there's this has ever been done for any other persons to have it from birth. Dr. Taylor Marshall emphasizes this fact really is the conclusive knot being closed again around Paul's denial, if he ever tried to deny he was a Herodian. In the first century, Hebrews with Roman privilege were linked to the Roman appointed rulers of Palestine, the Herods. There's no other persons that would have been linked by Roman citizenship from birth. So now when we go back to the chronology, you can see we can make an absolute confirmation that what had changed in 36 AD for Paul was the control he had through the Herodian family connection over the high priest ceased in 36 AD. That's because Vitellius ended the Herodian control of the high priest's garments, according to Josephus, Antiquities 18.14.3. And then he fired, Vitellius fired Caiaphas as a high priest. He was a civil administrator. He didn't care about the Herodians. He just wanted to clean out the things that were making the Jewish people feel disaffected. And the conversion of Saul is just a convenient, obvious activity of the Herodians to now, hey, we don't have any more control to create a scapegoat out of the high priest. Let's try infiltration. Let's find out what's going on in the Christian movement. Paul, Saul, you got to defect over to them and then find out what you can. And basically, he made an original contact with them in Acts 9, that era. And then they didn't believe he really meant Jesus. And then they get rid of him. And they send him back to Tarsus, Cilicia, when some disputes came up. Some Greeks actually were angry at Paul. That's unusual to think about, but to imagine why. But anyway, that's what happens in Acts 9. There's no positive response to him at the time. He's sent back. He goes to Arabia then for 14 years at another time. So all this time, there's no epistles, no nothing until 51 AD, approximately, Thessalonians comes out. And that's it. And so there's no activity. There's none of those journeys of Paul. Those don't happen for decades. Okay, that's really what you have to put in mind. At least 14 years, 17 years by some calculations. And the conversion of Saul is a very convenient way of covering up what's really going on. Is he's out of a job in terms of working with the high priest as cover. Now he has to go undercover to create a new persona so he can be monitoring the Christian movement and do whatever needs to be done to divert it from its true goals and to destroy it. And that's what we're here to help expose and help us get back to following Christ. Okay, God bless everybody. Ciao, bye.